had helped to foment the French Revolution, while the Reverend Jedediah Morse, the father of Samuel B. Morse, who invented the telegraph, declared that Jefferson was an Illuminatus. Like Weishaupt and those who began the French Revolution, Jefferson had his own contempt for the gospel of Jesus Christ and set about to write his own version of it, now known as the Jefferson Bible. In a letter to John Adams, he wrote, "In the New Testament, there is internal evidence that parts of it have proceeded from an extraordinary man, and that other parts are of the fabric of very inferior minds. It is as easy to separate those parts as to pick out diamonds from dunghills." Among those parts of the gospel that Jefferson considered to be dunghills were things like the virgin birth, the miracles of Jesus, and the resurrection of Christ, about which the Apostle Paul wrote, "If Christ be not raised, your faith is in vain." Yet all of these things were cut out of Jefferson's version of the New Testament. In the Bible, God says, "Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish anything from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you." The Bible also says, "If any man preach any other gospel, let him be accursed." Concerning the book of Revelation, Jefferson wrote, "It is between 50 and 60 years since I read it, and I then considered it merely the ravings of a maniac, no more worthy nor capable of explanation than the incoherences of our own nightly dreams." Jefferson's tombstone seems to best define his true faith, an Egyptian obelisk that he himself designed prior to his death. Like the all-seeing eye, the obelisk is a symbol of the ancient mystery religion, the same worship of Freemasonry and the Illuminati. The idea of the Illuminati, or of a plan for the overthrow of nations, was not always considered the stuff of conspiracy theorists and fanatics. It was written of by men like George Washington. So concerned was Washington over the Jacobin threat in America that he came out of retirement and again accepted the appointment of Commander-in-Chief of the Army to fight against the movement. In a letter to the Reverend W.D. Schneider in 1798, Washington wrote, "I have heard of the nefarious and dangerous plan and doctrines of the Illuminati. It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more fully satisfied of this fact than I am." There are many such references concerning the presence of Illuminism in America. Reportedly, Harvard's Houghton Library contains numerous sermons, pamphlets, and books denouncing Illuminism or the Illuminati during the late 1790s and early 1800s. Warnings were even preached in churches, such as this 1812 sermon by the Reverend Joseph Willard, who said, "There is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have been established in this land of gospel light and civil liberty, which were first organized from the Grand Society in France. They are doubtless secretly striving to undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred." In 1885, Monsignor George Dillon wrote, "Communism is but a form of the illuminated masonry of Weishaupt." The Russian Revolution, like the revolution in France, is often portrayed as the noble struggle of just men desiring to overthrow an unjust monarchy. But as with Weishaupt and his inspired French revolt, a conspiracy against God is to be found at the very heart of it. In his book, Marx and Satan, author Richard Wurmbrand exposes the truth about the man most credited with the communist idea. Marx began his life as a professing Christian, even writing a poem titled "The Union of the Faithful with Christ in Favor of Christianity." But by the time he finished high school, somehow his heart had turned. In another poem he wrote, "I wish to avenge myself against the one who rules above." In a poem titled "Pale Maiden," Marx wrote, "Thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well, my soul once true to God is chosen for hell." But Marx was not alone in his thoughts of damnation. He surrounded himself with like-minded fellows at the Internationale, a working man's association with a secret agenda. French historian E. Freiberg wrote, the Internationale everywhere found support in Freemasonry, while author William T. Still writes that the Internationale can hardly be viewed as anything but Illuminized Masonry in a new disguise. Among Marx's comrades were men like Mikhail Bakunin, who wrote, "The evil one is the satanic revolt against divine authority. Satan, the eternal rebel, the first free thinker, and the emancipator of worlds." Then there was Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who wrote, "Come, Satan, slandered by small and by kings. God is stupidity and cowardice. God is hypocrisy and falsehood. God is evil." Or Heinrich Heine, called the intimate friend of Marx, who wrote, "I called the devil, and he came. His face with wonder I must scan. He is not ugly, he is not lame. He is a delightful, charming man." Wurmbrand writes that Marx and his comrades, while anti-God, were not atheists as present-day Marxists claim to be. That is, while they openly denounced and reviled God, they hated a God in whom they believed. When the revolution broke out in Paris in 1871, the Communard Florins declared, "Our enemy is God. Hatred of God is the beginning of wisdom." Marx greatly praised the Communards, who openly proclaimed this aim. Such was the thinking of the men whose influence would change the world through communism. As Nesta Webster wrote, the Internationale became simply an engine of warfare against civilization. Just as the Jacobin Club had openly executed the hidden plan of the Illuminati, the Internationale, holding within it the same terrible secrets, carried on the work of world revolution. This revolution would next enter into Russia to overthrow Tsar Nicholas II and his family, who were brutally murdered on July 17, 1918. As with the French Revolution, the powers that took over were far more bloodthirsty and cruel than any monarch in Russia's history. The two chief instruments, Lenin and Trotsky, inspired a civil war that cost 28 million Russian lives. When Joseph Stalin inherited Lenin's legacy, he would be called the most dictatorial and murderous tyrant the world had ever known. His own daughter said of him, quote, "A terrible demon had taken possession of my father's soul." It is now estimated by Soviet sources that Stalin's reign of terror killed 40 million Russians, a far greater death toll than what is so often attributed to Adolf Hitler. Sources claim that Europeans and Americans financed Lenin and Trotsky in their attempts to foment a revolution in Russia. Many have seen in this a global conspiracy. Among them was a young Winston Churchill, who made this statement where he tied it all together in a London newspaper in 1920. He said, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx to those of Trotsky, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization has been steadily growing. It played a definitely recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire." Yet in 1945, Churchill would be among the three leaders at the infamous meeting at Yalta, an historic event that many argue was a gigantic push for the New World Order. Is it possible that somehow Churchill's youthful convictions changed 25 years later? For now he would sit in support of the very movement he sought to expose. The Soviet Union, under the bloody leadership of Joseph Stalin, was given power over half of Europe, a decision that would later lead to the murder of countless millions. It is said this was largely due to the efforts of Franklin D. Roosevelt. FDR was also responsible for putting the Masonic seal on the back of the U.S. dollar bill, with the all-seeing eye and the words Novus Ordo Seclorum, translated by many researchers as the New World Order. The Reverend Jim Shaw, a former 33rd degree Mason who left the order and wrote his book titled The Deadly Deception, was interviewed by a reporter in 1989. We read that, concerning the famous picture at the Yalta Conference, Reverend Shaw said, "And there they were, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, all three Masons." Some may suggest that Yalta was simply the poor judgment of men who did